Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Language Arts Gallery. Today, we're going to continue with day 3 of writing a comparative essay for young learners. So, if you're interested in the material that I use to teach this writing workshop lesson, you can find all 6 lessons available in my comparative essay packet in my TPT store, and the link is in the video description. So let's go ahead and let's start by reviewing some of the things that we talked about in our last few lessons. So remember, we're writing an essay to compare and contrast two things. And those two things that we're comparing and contrasting are Alaska and our hometown. Remember, when we compare two things, we talk about how they're the same. And when we contrast two things, we talk about how they're different. So it should include what we're comparing and contrasting, in what ways they're the same, that's going to make up one body paragraph, and in what ways the two things are different, that's going to make up our second body paragraph. And we want to give details and examples to support whether we believe that Alaska is more similar to our hometown or more different from our hometown. So let's take a look at our introduction. If you'd like, you can pause the video here and you can read through this. So this is an essay by Jenny, and you can see that the title gives us a clue as to her feeling about how her hometown is like or unlike Alaska. And she says, "My hometown is not like Alaska." So she's got an introduction where she states her opinion, her thesis statement there in the last sentence. She's got the first body paragraph where she talks about how it's the same. And remember, this is a very short body paragraph because her thesis or her argument is that Alaska is mostly very different. So in her second body paragraph, I can see that's much longer. She's given me a lot of ways that Alaska is different from her hometown of Springfield. And then finally, she's got a conclusion where she restates her thesis and she leaves the reader with a final thought. So in today's lesson, we're going to work on writing a good introduction. We're going to talk about 3 things that an introduction to a comparative essay should have. And these are really specific to young learners. We're looking at grades 2 or 3. You could even use this with grade 4 students. So we want to really teach them the building blocks of writing a good essay, because as they get a little bit older, they're going to have to write 5-paragraph essays, and this is a 4-paragraph essay. It's as students get older, they'll refer to this as the block method to a comparative essay. So we're giving them that foundation right now. So what should a good introduction include? Well, we want to get the reader's attention, or we want to hook the reader. We want to introduce the topic. In this case, that's the two things that are being compared and contrasted. In Jenny's essay, it's her hometown of Springfield and Alaska. And we want to tell the main idea of the essay. This is Jenny's thesis statement. Remember, she said that my hometown is very different from Alaska. So let's take a closer look here. So when we want to engage the reader, we can use several different strategies to hook the reader or draw them in. So one thing we can do is we can use a strong statement. We can ask the reader a question, or we can present an interesting fact. So normally with my older students, I don't teach this second strategy because as we get into more formal academic writing, we don't want to have our students asking questions, particularly as we get to middle and high school. It's certainly off limits in academic writing at university level, like a thesis or dissertation. And I know a lot of teachers will say, okay, we're only talking about second or third graders here, but remember, everything we do now is the foundation to get our kids to that level. So I teach my students when they're young learners that asking a question, engaging directly with your audience as a way to draw them in is okay. So let's look at a few examples of these. Here, this is the introductory sentence that our author uses. Jenny says, Alaska is a very special place. Now, that's a very plain sentence. It does tell us that, Alaska is special and it builds to what she's going to talk about with how it's similar and different from her hometown. But I really want to get the reader's attention. So I know we can make this better. One way is a strong statement. Alaska is the most amazing place on Earth. Now, that's a very powerful statement, and we can see we've got an exclamation point here. And that pairs really well with sentence level work on exclamations. We can use a question. Can you imagine seeing a polar bear on a glacier? Wow, what a great strategy. And again, I wouldn't use this if I was teaching university students, but for young learners, I think this is a great way for them to be creative. And I have to say, my young learners usually choose this strategy. They love asking questions. Or an interesting fact. Alaska has over 100,000 glaciers. So if you're getting your students to engage with technology, perhaps you've read a text on Alaska where the students might want to pull out an interesting fact. But if you're getting them to use the internet, you may have them search for interesting facts on Alaska. We want to talk about what we're going to compare. So in our model essay, Jenny says Alaska is a very special place. In some ways, it is like my hometown of Springfield. So I've got those two topics for comparison, Alaska and my hometown of Springfield. Another way I can say this is blank and blank have some similarities, or Alaska and my hometown of Springfield have some similarities. Or in this essay, I will compare and contrast Alaska with Springfield. Again, as my students are older, I would move away from first person pronouns, but I allow my younger students to write academic essays in the first person. Then we want to express our main idea. As our students get older, we're going to teach them about thesis statements. So if you have kids that you're looping up with, maybe from third to fourth grade, and you want to use this, or from fourth to fifth grade, this is a great way to get your kids to understand what a thesis statement is. We're not presenting it that way right now. We're presenting it as the main idea of our essay. But this is ultimately what our student is going to be arguing, even Jenny. So Jenny says, however, Alaska is mostly very different from Springfield. So that's her argument. That's her thesis statement or the main idea of the essay. So I know that Jenny's mostly going to talk about the differences. And that's why I said that second body paragraph that focuses on differences, I expect that to be much longer, more significant than that first paragraph that talks about similarities. So, as you go through with your students, as you go through the model essays or you go through the first drafts that they've written, you can use this checklist to have them self-evaluate their writing. Does the first sentence get the reader's attention? We said no. In our model essay, it doesn't. But Jenny does do a good job telling the reader what's being compared, and she does do a good job sharing her main idea. So this is great using this checklist if you want the kids to go through a model essay, if you want them to self-reflect and go through their own essay, or if you want to break them off into pairs and have them do some peer review of one another's introduction. This is a great tool. So let's take a look here at our revised essay. As we can see, or I should say our revised introduction to our essay. So as we can see, most of it is very similar. All we did was change that first sentence. We gave it a more engaging hook. So I think that's a good way to demonstrate to our students that this is important. These are the important building blocks of the essay. And we don't need to change the whole thing. We just need to fix what needs to be fixed. And normally, in my experience, most of my students do a pretty good job presenting the topics for comparison and presenting their thesis or main idea, but they usually need a little help engaging the reader. But again, this is something that's really fun. It's really enjoyable for kids to learn. They like using exclamations. They like engaging directly with the reader by using questions. So that's great practice for them. So as you break out with your students, you can have them use this graphic organizer where they're going to come up with each of the three key components of a good introduction. They're going to practice hooking the reader, and we've got those strategies listed here. They're going to talk about the two things that they're comparing, and they're going to state the main idea. So if you're teaching students in Atlanta, Georgia, or Jacksonville, Florida, then this is likely going to be the same. It may not. If you have students from out of town who've just moved, they may choose to write about the city or town that they've come from previously. But you should have at least 3 sentences here. And I also like this because as we get older, I try to teach my students that we want to stay away from those 1, 2 sentence, not really 1 sentence, but 2 sentence paragraphs. We want our paragraphs to have at least 3 sentences. And as they get older and they're going to be writing in high school and university, that's generally what's going to be expected of them. So we want to build that foundation now. Okay, so thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. And please remember to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. And I will see you in our next video where we're going to talk about day 4 of writing a comparative essay for young learners.